Hello Internet, and welcome to this video about building the ultimate survival Minecraft village. I've called it the Utopia project because basically I'm concocting a village where you have all the upsides of a village, like golems and trading, but none of the downsides, like zombies messing with your stuff. In this video I'll be explaining exactly what goes into a village. So I'll be explaining some basic village mechanics, and then I'll combine all those mechanics into sort of the master plan of building this ultimate village. And so to start this, I'd like to start by explaining what actually a village is, and it turns out that to understand that you need to understand what a house is. And now, a house is a very strictly defined thing in Minecraft, which is a door with a roof on one side and no roof on the other side. Basically what the game does is it checks the 5 blocks in front of a door and behind a door and checks whether those blocks have access to the sky. So I'm just taking these images from the Minecraft wiki, by the way, which is excellent. So if you have a roof sort of like this over your door, there will be 5 blocks behind the door that are all covered, and 2 blocks in front of the door that are not covered. This means that there is a difference between how many blocks are covered on one side versus how many blocks are covered on the other. And when that happens, the game will count it as a valid house. It doesn't have to be all covered or none covered, as long as the 5 blocks on one side have more access to the sky than the other side, it will be counted as a house. So basically when we're talking about houses, we're actually talking about doors. You could create a whole bunch of houses by just putting down a row of doors and putting a tiny roof over one end, and those would all count as individual houses. Or you could build a giant mansion, and as long as you don't put a wooden door in it, it will not count as a house. Now, there's one more thing that you need to make a door a house, and that's a villager. A villager needs to be near the door to see it, for it to be added to a village. And the villagers will check a 16 by 16 box around themselves to see if there's any valid doors, and when they do see one of those doors, they will add it to a village. So now we're starting to see what a village actually is. So a village is one or more doors, and once you have that valid door, the village itself will be an area that is a sphere with a radius of at least 32 around the center of all the doors. So here you've just got one door, and so you will have a village centered on that door as a 32 radius sphere. Now, of course, you can have multiple doors in a village. They will just get added as they get observed. For instance, if you have a door like over here, and over there. The game will calculate the middle point between all those doors, and the center of the village will be centered on that middle of all those doors. And the 32 block radius, that's the minimum. If there's any doors that are also in the village that are further away than those 32, then the boundary of the village is going to expand to that furthest door. So for example, the door here on the left might cause the village to get bigger than the 32 block radius. So now that we've talked about what a village is, why would you want to have one? One of them is spawning golems. If you've played Minecraft for a while, you probably know about iron golem farms. It's a great source of iron, it's renewable, it's very environmentally friendly essentially, and there are several rules that your village needs to obey in order for it to spawn golems at all. First of all, you're going to need 21 doors or more, or no golems are going to spawn, and you're going to need at least 10 villagers. If your village doesn't meet these requirements, you're not going to get any golems. Once you do meet these requirements, the golems are going to spawn in a box centered around, once again, the center of your village. It's a 16 by 16 by 6 box, and only within this area are the golems going to spawn. So it's a lot smaller than the entire village, and it's a fairly easy area to sort of wall off and make sure that you collect all the golems so you can humanely euthanize them and collect their iron. Another reason you might want to have a village is to do some farming. The villagers with the brown robes are going to collect crops for you. They're going to throw them at other villagers to feed them if they have the chance. But there are lots of ways to collect the crops before they actually do that, so that you can have a nice fully automatic crop farm. Now, an important thing to note here is that villagers will only tend to crops that are within the village boundary. So if you make your crop fields too far out of the village sphere, they're not going to actually do anything to them. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. So another reason you might want to have a village is so you can do trading with the villagers. As you know, they will trade stuff for emeralds. You can sell them stuff to get emeralds, or you can give them emeralds to get stuff. And so the ones that I definitely want to have in my ultimate village is 2 farmers. First of all, because they are the farmers that are going to run those automatic farms that I just talked about, but then I'm going to take those potatoes and carrots that they farmed and trade them to these farmers to get some emeralds. It's a pretty good way to essentially automatically generate emeralds. Another one that I definitely want is the priest, because he will trade me glowstone and redstone. Redstone is fairly easy to get by mining, but glowstone you have to get into the nether and risk falling into lava and all that stuff. So I would rather just obtain it from this guy. I also want 3 of those black apron villagers. One is the armor smith, who's going to sell me diamond chest plates. One is the weaponsmith, who's going to give me diamond swords and diamond axes. And then there's a toolsmith who trades for diamond pickaxes. So it's a very good way to get essentially renewable diamond gear without having to spend days underground trying to get some more diamonds for your stuff. And then there's 2 librarians that I want. Librarians will trade for books that might have useful enchantments on them, so I'm going to have to breed a couple of librarians and trade them to see what books they want to sell me, and just keep the ones that are very useful, like Slick Dutch or Mending or whatever you want to get. There's also a couple of villagers that I don't want on a permanent basis. I think I want to have 1 cartographer, but once I've traded him for a couple of treasure maps, I'm pretty much done with him. I don't need him to be a permanent asset in my village. And the same goes for a leather worker, where I want to buy a couple of saddles, but once you have 5 saddles, you're pretty much set for life, so I don't need those to be a permanent part of my village. Now, I mentioned it briefly already. I'm going to breed a couple of these dudes and see which ones have the trades that I want. So breeding is actually a mechanic that's also going to be very relevant, because there's a cap to how many villagers are going to breed in your village. And that cap is defined by the number of doors in your village. You take the number of doors, you multiply it by 0.35, or you take essentially 35% of the number of doors, and that is the maximum number of villagers that are gonna breed in your village. So once you reach that cap, no matter how much you trade them, how much you feed them, they're not gonna breed anymore. Now there's a special way in which this population cap is counted, and that's fairly abusable. So there's a funny thing about breeding, about how this is calculated. Basically, the whole population within the sphere of your village is gonna want to breed if the village is eligible to breed. However, the population cap is only counted within a 9-high box around the center of the village. So in this case, only the villager in the middle would be counted towards the cap, whereas all of them would go into breeding mode if you feed them or trade them. So this is how most infinite villager breeders work. You just make sure that the bulk of your villagers are outside the range of that population counting box, so they will just keep breeding indefinitely. And that's how you get access to a whole bunch of villagers that you can just pick and choose from which ones you want to keep. So I want to have this option in my village. There is also something I don't want, and that's zombie sieges. No zombie sieges allowed. So what is a zombie siege? It's a special event that can happen to a village where, under certain conditions, a bunch of zombies are going to spawn around the edge of the village, and they're going to attack your villagers because they like brains. And zombie sieges are especially annoying because the zombie spawning here disregards all the normal zombie spawning conditions. You know, normally zombies don't spawn if the light level is 7 or higher. They don't spawn in transparent blocks like slabs or stairs or glass or whatever. But this is not the case for zombie sieges. Those zombies will spawn regardless of your light level, regardless of the block that they're spawning on. They will happen. And this is a very good way to lose a whole bunch of villagers and have to deal with zombies running all over the place. So I don't want them. Fortunately, the zombies won't spawn in villages that are deemed too small. And too small is, it has either less than 10 doors or it has less than 20 villagers. Now, if you'll remember, we already needed at least 21 doors to get golems to spawn, so the less than 10 doors requirement is not something I can do. But less than 20 villagers is an option, so that's what we're going to go for. We're going to keep to 19 villagers or less. And the final thing that I don't want is these sort of industrial looking ugly builds. Yes, everybody's seen those highly efficient iron farms that are these huge contraptions, but I just don't like the way they look. I want my build to look pretty. I want a village that is idyllic. It has some villagers roaming around. It has them in little shops where they sell me their stuff. Basically, I want to have some fun with this and make it be a pleasant place for me to be in. So just to summarize what the final requirements for the village are. First of all, we're going to need at least 21 doors and at least 10 villagers to get any golems to spawn. So that is something we just cannot work around. And in order to collect the golems, we need to know where the center of the village is. And that is an interesting thing. You know that I told you that the center of the village is determined by sort of finding the middle between all the doors? Let's go into the details of that a little bit. Basically, if you have 2 doors, it's very easy to know where the center is. It's right between the 2 doors. But if you add a couple more doors, like how does that work? You could take all the x, y, and z coordinates of all those doors and average them, and what you would end up with would be the center of your village. So you could calculate the center of your village in a spreadsheet, but you'd have to go around noting all those coordinates, and if you change the position of one of the doors, it's going to change the whole thing. It's going to be pretty difficult. So what I've come up with to make it a bit easier to figure out where the center of the village is to use symmetry. Basically, with these 2 doors, I know exactly where the middle is. It's right between those 2 doors. And if I add additional doors in pairs, where the middle of the line between that pair of doors is the same as the middle that I already had, the middle is not going to shift. So let me just demonstrate this in a creative world that I've set up for this. Alright, so here I've just marked out where I would want a village to go. You've got the orange square in the middle that indicates where I want the middle of my village to be, and then I've sort of marked the edges, sketched it out with the other orange blocks, and the blue blocks represent where the golems would spawn if you made the village here. So let's say we want to make sure that the center of the village is right in the middle of these 4 blocks here. I'm going to just place some a random door over here. And you can see that it's sort of 2 blocks away from the golem spawning area and 2 blocks out from the center. So if I wanted to make sure that the middle was still where I wanted to go, I would have to place the other door right... is it here? Let's double check. 2 blocks between there. Yep. So if you put the other block here, and you would draw a line right between those 2 doors, you'll note that the middle of that line would be right there. So this is how you can place pairs of doors that are going to all have the middle right here. So if you wanted to then add some more doors to your village, you could put one out here. Let's see if we can match that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 from here, so you would have to go 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I think it was 10 between. You put your door over here. Oh, I forgot to put the door there. Put it down, and now the middle line between those two doors is also going right across that village. Just put one more, just for sort of demonstration purposes. If you put one here, one, I wanted it. So if you put one here, 2, and here, then you've still got a symmetrical village where the center is still exactly where you think it is. And so you can use this to basically move all your doors around. This doesn't just work horizontally, like I've just laid them out all on the same Y level, but if you would, for some reason, want to raise this door up by 1, then you could keep the middle where you think it is by just lowering the matching door on the other side by 1. So this would now be still be a balanced village. And so you can use this if you're going to build a nice looking village. Like if I'm gonna build a little house around this door, and I want the entrance to be exactly 1 off the floor, you know, that works, because that's where it already is. But if I wanted to raise it up because I want a staircase entrance, or I want to make it 1 lower because maybe the terrain over there is 1 block lower, you'd want to lower your doors, you can do that. Like you can mess with this if, say, for some reason you want this to be higher or lower, you can make design features on the other side to make that higher or lower as you see fit. Now another thing that I want to point out is that you don't need all your houses, like your pretty houses that you're going to build around these doors, to be inside the village perimeter. You only need the doors to be inside. So if you go right up to the edge of the village and you place a door over here, and you would place, you know, a matching door over on the other side, you can, no big deal, just extend the house to the outside of the boundary without any issues. It wouldn't mess with anything. So you have quite a lot of freedom in how you design all the houses in the village, as long as you make sure that the doors are set up correctly. And that is how you control where the center of your village is without too much spreadsheeting. So now that we've figured out how to actually control the center, we also need to make sure that all the doors actually stay active, because remember, the doors are only added to the village if there is a villager nearby to see them. So if you want this math to work, you need all of those doors to stay active where the center of your village will shift. So we will have to lock up a couple of villagers in sort of each quadrant of the village to make sure that they see all the doors and the center doesn't shift. Because you could get golems spawning outside your golem trap, and that would be very annoying to deal with. Another thing that we've already touched on is to have at most 19 villagers to prevent the zombie sieges. And we still want to have the option to breed, though. And this is going to be a bit of an issue, because let's look at the breeding requirements again. Basically, the population that I want is between 10 and 19 villagers. Remember, we need at least 10 for the golems to spawn, and at most 19 to prevent zombie sieges from happening. And also remember that I wanted at least 8 sort of stationary permanent villagers that I can trade with and that can farm for me. So if I had 8 villagers locked up and then the other 2 to get to the golem limit would just wander around the village, I think that would be a pretty dead place. I want to have more. But you need a lot of doors for them to breed up to that cap. If you have 29 doors, then the villager cap is going to be 10 villagers. So that is the absolute minimum number of doors I would need to have in my village in order for them to breed up to 10. and that's not many. Remember, if I have 8 locked up, that means there's 2 wandering around, and those 2 are going to be the only ones capable of breeding, because they're the only 2 that are capable of reaching each other. On the flip side, if you want a whole lot of villagers, like the whole 19, that would require 55 doors. And that's a lot of doors. I mean, I can come up with some creative houses that have 2 or 3 doors in them as a design feature, maybe, but 55 doors is kind of pushing it. Now, there is a way to kind of solve this if you make some double walls into one of your houses and just plunk a whole bunch of doors in there. They won't be visible, but they will still count as valid houses if you have enough roof on one side and air on the other. So that's a way to sort of deal with it. And another way to deal with it is to get some of the villagers that you are actively using outside of that population cap box, like we talked about. So I think I'm going to go for a combination of solutions where I'm going to plunk a couple extra doors here and there. I'm going to put maybe the librarian on the 2nd floor of the library where he's outside of the breeding box, or maybe put the priest in some kind of mystical cave that is just outside the village boundary so he doesn't get counted, and then add a few doors here and there. And in the end, I will probably reach a breeding cap that is acceptable to me. But this is something that I will work out as I'm building the actual village. Alright, so here I am on a Minecraft survival server that's called NamelessCraft. The map got reset a couple of weeks ago, so everyone is still building up their stuff, and so am I. I just wanted to show you where I'm going to put my village. I've got this savanna biome where I'm going to put the center of the village right here, and then you can see the other yellow wool blocks marking where the sphere would just about end. It's back there, over there, and behind that tree just there. So basically I'm not going to make it all the way to the mountains, which means I could build some building that is halfway, like maybe has its door inside the boundary, but then the rest of it reaches the mountain. Or I could build a cave in there to put my priest. And alternatively, I am not making it all the way to the shore on the other side, though I do think that this little river bit is going to be inside the village still. So maybe I can make some little like fisherman's hut or whatever. And I'm going to build a village here that's going to be sort of Byzantine in style. So I've already gathered up a bunch of sandstone, and I just need to transport the villagers. There's a village in a desert back there that I've secured, and I'm just going to be grabbing some boats and ferrying my villagers over. And when I'm a bit further along and I have something to show you about what the actual village is like, I'll just check back in with you guys. So stay tuned for that, and I'll see you next time. Bye!